I'm Shahar Azani, and in the news, commemorating the 25th anniversary of the assassination of Israel's late Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin of blessed memory. The mid-90s was an incredibly turbulent time in Israel. The Oslo Accords were signed in Washington, D.C., and hope flowed through the air that something might change in the Middle East, that maybe, just maybe, there is a glimmer of hope to reach peace in the region and find a settlement to Israel's long conflict with the Palestinians. However, quickly enough, Israel's streets started flowing with blood, a direct result of Palestinian homicide attacks claiming the lives of scores of people and injuring thousands. Emotions ran high, very high. And it was in that moment, on Saturday night, November 4th of 1995, at the Kings of Israel Square in Tel Aviv, later renamed Rabin Square, that Israel and millions of Israelis changed forever. 3 shots, that's all it took. 3 shots in the back, and Israel's Prime Minister Rabin lost consciousness and fell, never to rise again, only minutes after a major peace rally in Tel Aviv. Who could have believed? Who would have thought that in Israel, the Jewish state, something like this could happen? A state in a state of shock and disbelief. One of the most touching moments of that horrible night was the announcement made by Eitan Haber, Rabin's aide and right-hand man, a wordsmith, who tearfully announced the death of the assassinated Israeli Prime Minister outside of the hospital in Tel Aviv. And so he said, "The government of Israel announces in shock and disbelief, with great sadness and deep sorrow, the death of Prime Minister and Defense Minister Yitzhak Rabin, who was murdered by an assassin tonight in Tel Aviv." Haber passed away last month at the age of 80. May his memory be of blessing. Just as piercing were the words uttered just a few days later at Rabin's state funeral in Jerusalem, which saw many leaders arriving from the region and all over the world to pay respects to the fallen leader. It was a eulogy made by Rabin's granddaughter, Noa ben Artzi Philosoph, today Noa Rothman, at the age of 18. She moved the entire nation of Israel and much of the world to tears with her words, exhibiting immense strength. She said, "You will forgive me, for I do not want to talk about peace. I want to talk about my grandfather." Let's take a listen.
Excuse me, I do not want to speak about peace. I'd like to speak about my grandfather. You always wake up with a nightmare. Last night I woke up with a nightmare. It just cannot be digested. The TV does not stop broadcasting your face. You're so real that I can't help not touching you. You were, Grandpa, you were the pillar of fire in front of the camp. Now we just have the camp alone, dark, and we're so cold and alone. I know that people are speaking in terms of national tragedy, but how can you comfort a whole nation and involve them in your personal pain when a grandmother cannot stop crying? And we feel the incredible open vacuum, the open space without you. I'm being taken apart from you, a hero, and I wish you great rest and peace, and you will think and miss us. We below love you very much. And I hope that the angels that are accompanying you now, I hope that they will guard over you. And guard over you well, because you're worthy of it. Grandpa, we love you very much, always.
Today, we are pleased to have with us on JBS, all the way from Israel, Noa Rothman, Rabin's granddaughter, an attorney by training and an accomplished screenwriter, as well as a public and political activist in Israel. It's an honor to have you with us, Noa. Thank you and welcome on JBS.
Thank you so much, Shahar. Good evening.
First of all, there is so much I'd like to talk to you about, but maybe let's begin. This month, we commemorate 25 years since the assassination, which changed Israel forever. So before we touch on politics, let me ask you about Rabin, the person. What is it that you remember the most about your grandfather?
To me, it's a person for such a long time. It's mainly in the small personal moments, like when I used to call him and he would answer the phone, and then there was no ID caller back then. So he would pick up the phone and say hello, and then he would hear my voice, and his voice would softly change to recognize me. I miss those moments. I miss having him in a lot of aspects. I think that growing up is partly a sad procedure. And if you have a leader who is uniquely the leader of the camp, the leader of the family, and the leader of your country, as it was my privilege to grow up this way. So he's missed a lot, yes.
You know, in your eulogy that, we all, heard, and it's very much with us for all of those years, you spoke about your grandfather. And I think Rabin, the person, I believe it was in one of your past interviews, you mentioned the issue of meeting time, and how your grandfather used to be very much on point when it comes to respecting other people's time. And in a time and age when being fashionably late or, waiting for 3 hours for a leader has become a feature, how do you feel about this? How does that make you feel?
Well, better and worse, my grandfather was a soldier and an officer. And being punctual on time was unseparate part of our life. And I remember when we gathered every Shabbat for a Shabbat dinner, if we were late, he wouldn't speak to my mom the whole dinner. And he used to be very, very strict about it. I think it was the only thing that I really remember that he was very strict about. Coming on time, not making anyone wait for you, because it's rude. What rudeness is being late. That was life by him.
You are a very representative person, and at the age of 18, you're standing on the stage there, on the state funeral, in front of all of those world leaders. How easy or difficult was it for you? I mean, you were the only representative of the family that rose to speak. Have you always assumed this position, or is this something that came out around the time of the murder, or were you always kind of like the spokesperson, the leader?
I grew up in a totally private, as much as possible, being so related to such a central person, but a very private family. In terms of, I was not well known. The 70s, 80s, 90s were completely different than what we know of media exposure these days. The family story maybe was well known. There was a lot of gossip about my parents' divorcee, but no one really knew us, and we never were, as should be, a part of his political career. We were the fans from the back. But as a family performance, yes, I was. I was the one who was writing poems, and I was the one who was writing all the birthday wishes on the family celebration, and so on and so forth. But I think that shock and ignorance mainly led to the decision to nominate me as the family speaker, since we didn't really know what we were facing. Uh, uh, of course, the night of the assassination, and also through the following days, where the funeral took place. It wasn't a family affair. It wasn't a family funeral. It was a national one, and the fact that who was coming, we were not part of the guest list or anything like this. And when I was asked by my grandfather's staff to be the family speaker, it was natural, of course, as a family member. But I didn't really knew what the funeral would be like, and I didn't really know that the whole world practically would be watching.
Well, you know that the impact goes beyond words as much as it can go.
You have to understand it wasn't only a moment of history, it's a moment of personal history.
Yes.
And a moment where maybe it wasn't never a real wall, but the wall between the private and the national fell forever that day.
You know, it reminds me that the sentence that you said, "You will forgive me, for I do not want to talk about peace. I want to talk about my grandfather," and that really resonated what you're saying now.
Yeah, but I guess little did I know. Yeah.
Well, I want to tell you that, you know, the personal leads to the political and to the diplomatic. And we remember, you know, of your grandfather's modesty, civil service to the core by the name of civil servant, to really serve the public and the state of Israel. I remember 43 days before the assassination, he was interviewed on Israel's major talk shows, and he was asked about, do you even take vacation or that time off? And, you know, shyly with his authoritative voice, he looks and, you know, without a hint of a smile, he says no. And I think that very much stayed with the way we perceive civil service. And I want to go directly to the diplomatic part. I remember one of the most memorable images of the peace process was that picture when King Hussein, the late King Hussein of Jordan, was lighting the cigarette for your grandfather, for Yitzhak Rabin. And it was Eliakim Rubinstein, Chief Justice today, and one of the peace negotiators then, who said personal chemistry was key to peace with Jordan. The personality really played a part in the ability to move things forward.
I agree. I think that maybe in those days it wasn't that well known, but as a scriptwriter, I can tell you that it's always the personal motivation and the personal chemistry that makes the story. Because at the end of the day, it's people to people. And mainly leaders to leaders. We can see it throughout history, and it was quite the same with President Clinton, who shared great personal chemistry, was a key to the American approach towards the peace in the area as a whole. And it was a major change from the administration before and after. But it was never, and with the Americans and the Jordanians and the Egyptians and in international diplomacy, it is personal chemistry, but at the end of the day, it's very, very serious matters on the table. And it has nothing to do, these are people that has, you cannot say that these are people who has no ego, but you could say that these are people who've tasted the taste of success, and they are intelligent and optimist and self-confident enough to understand that cooperation and reconciliation is the cure for humanity.
I want to touch a bit on your talent as a writer. Your grandfather was a brave man, a champion of Israel. He fought in many wars to defend Israel, to defend the people of Israel and the country. And then the moment he leaves this earth, it happens with 3 shots into the back. The exact opposite from how he lived, facing danger head on. Isn't that, how does that...
You mentioned before civil servant. And since I was born in 1977, 2 weeks before he resigned from his first credential as Prime Minister of Israel, I knew him throughout my life as a civil servant, not as a soldier. And what you want most for your representative, mainly head of the family, and your personal hero in my case, is that his service will be accepted and will be appreciated by the people who is dedicating his life to. And assassination from the back is exactly the opposite. It feels the insult for many years was an engine. It troubled me a lot if he knew that he was assassinated from the back before he left this world. The doctor I asked said he doesn't believe he felt so. But these are the heavy emotions that you deal with after a political assassination. In my eyes, if I can share my view at that point.
Right. I have to say it also, many times it came on my mind, when he came down off the stage, happy, embraced by the people, especially when he was under so much attack. What did he know about leaving the earth? And was he happy in that moment? Didn't they say that he even smiled, or there was a hint of a smile on his face?
The doctor tried to reassure me and said he was, that you feel a gunshot at the back, like what we call in Hebrew chapcha,
right.
like a strong
a friendly smack.
Right. Yeah, a friendly. So it feels like this, and then he probably lost his
consciousness.
Yeah.
Right. It's been 25 years. I can't believe 25 years. We remember very well, I remember very well, the pain in the streets of Israel following the murder. Even personally, it was a very personal moment for me. It's engraved on my heart forever and ever. Now, looking back, I want to ask you from your position. You've been a public advocate. You've been working within Israel to make a change. You call yourself, you said, I'm a native. I'm going nowhere. This is my home. What do you think has changed, in your opinion? Did we, as a society in Israel, did we learn what we needed to learn from that horrible moment? If there is anything that, if we can even encapsulate it like that?
I think that it, weirdly enough to say 25 years later, two things. One is the fact that he was assassinated in the middle of the hottest conflict of our existence as a Jewish Democrat country. And these are questions that a society gives its answers to, not in a year or two, and not even in one credential, and not even in three. And I guess we didn't find the right answer even 25 years later. But if we want to be the Jewish homeland that we seek to be, so Israel must be as it is, as I grew up upon the belief that Israel is a miracle. Is a miracle due to the fact that it's Jews that are minority all over the world are the majority here. And they're subject to behave as a generous majority. And democratic and liberal values laying side by side and with the same intention as Jewish moral code as I was raised upon, they work greatly together. The problem is that since the assassination, these two are in constant conflict, not only due to assassination. The assassination has widened the gaps and the conflicts. And the Israelis and the Jewish communications at the same time are struggling in very different, similar conflicts, considering liberal values and democratic values and Jewish values, and putting them together in this melting pot we're hoping to keep alive to the next generations.
You had you said,
So said, I'm a native.
right.
I don't have it, but I see the importance of our sensibility and our moral existence, moral Jewish existence in Israel, as part of our mission as the capital of the Jewish world.
You know, you said something that I think really encapsulated your message. You said Israel should not only be a country worthy dying for, it should be a country worthy living in.
Yeah.
I want to touch upon the U.S. arena and the late Prime Minister's memory. We, right here in the U.S. last month, Americans for Peace Now held a memorial ceremony for Yitzhak Rabin of blessed memory. And it was the Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez who initially agreed to speak at the event, and then in response to the Twitterverse decided not to speak at the event, showing, you know, lack of understanding. I can tell you, I was really upset when that happened, not because of her, but because of what happens to memory over time. What did you think about this, and how did that make you feel?
I live ignorance aside, but the fact that, and I think I can combine my question to how you keep one's legacy alive, and to your question at the same time. What fear me the most about keeping my grandfather's memory alive is to make him into a saint. He was not a saint. He was a human being. He was a brave leader. He was the man of the hour who was willing to make very, very hard decisions for his people throughout his history. From his first day at the Palmach at the 1948 war through 1967 war, 75 Mivtza Entebbe, whatever this, and the peace process of the 90s and the first Intifada at the 80s, he was there. He made crucial and important decisions. You cannot support them all, and you're not expected to support them all. But he was assassinated because he was promoting the major change of the 90s, of taking advantage of the opportunities that were on the table back then in the 90s, and they're not the same. It's not, we have to know, it's not the same reality today as it was in the 90s. It was a window of opportunity, as my grandfather used to say. And he also said, you make peace with your enemies, not with your friends. With your friends, you don't have to make peace. You're already in peace with. And this is why I think that her refusal to be a part of keeping this legacy alive of the peace of the brave was so heartbreaking for many people.
Yes, it was. You know, we're thinking about politicians and photo ops and where it's good for politicians to be and where not. I'll never forget in those dire times of suicide attacks all over Israel, Rabin insisted on visiting the scenes, on looking in the eyes of the soldiers and the injured, on accompanying the process like everybody's father. I know he was your grandfather, but to us as a people, he meant a lot.
He really, I think that you cannot really be a leader if you don't care for your people. And we're talking about civil service. This is the service that should be, this is the base for the mutual trust between the leader and its people.
Yes, it is.
Being taken care of and taking care of things, and not being only where it's beautiful and comfortable. And you probably remember the horrible Shabbat evening of the Nachshon Waxman kidnapped by Hamas and the failure of the Compact Act. And my grandfather stood before the nation and said, I'm responsible for this failure. And I miss my grandfather, and I miss leaders in this capacity.
I think, I'll never forget his speech, even after the primaries and competing against Shimon Peres and then becoming partners. And he said, Ani ovil, ani anavet, I will lead, I will navigate. And that's definitely something that is direly needed in general, by the way. It's not only an Israeli lesson. I think universally, when you look at leaders, what he manifested in his personality, from the modesty to the responsibility, is something that could make a huge difference all over the world.
And as I said before, you don't want to remember him as a saint. And
yes.
Back then,
right,
talking about Ani Anavet, people saw it as ignorance.
Right.
Although that you cannot take responsibility unless you take full capacity of, there's only one. And there was a huge debate about it. People thought it was against Peres, that he was trying to say, I'm the one who won. But no, there's talk of how's the priority and how's his leadership and his management going to look like. And he stood for his words. So he was no saint, but he was definitely a hero.
Right. And let me ask you in conclusion, what is your message now, 25 years after the murder? And just in general, what do you want to say to our viewers, to Americans who are watching us, to the American Jewish community? What do you want them to take from our conversation?
I would say that solidarity. I think solidarity is the word of the hour. I can find a lot to connect it to my grandfather, but sometimes words are overdue. I think that's solidarity, and take authenticity with you wherever you go, and be generous with your power, and be and be optimistic, because we're lacking optimism. and if you're seeking for a solidarity cause, optimism would be it, and it's for free.
You know what, seeing your smile on this day, we remember your grandfather as a person, as a civil servant. Be kind and be good, people. Nothing is more important. Noa, thank you so much for joining us on JBS. I'd like to thank you for your words of courage, wisdom, and hope. It's a pleasure having you with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you for remembering and commemorating. Thank you.
So there we have it. An event which changed the course of history and changed a state as a whole. There is a major lesson to learn from that horrible night in Tel Aviv. And it's not about politics, but rather the slippery slope that is incitement and political discourse going rogue. It's all too easy to get carried away with political disagreements. But remember, nothing should be taken for granted. And if we do not take the necessary steps and measures to maintain boundaries and create proper public discourse, remember, maintain our humanity and our ability to converse properly, yes, politely, things can go terribly wrong, terribly fast, no matter what your political beliefs are. May Rabin's memory be a blessing, and may we all be better people with every day that's going by. Let that be the lesson we take with us from this horrible memory. And thank you all for watching. To all, we wish you stay safe and stay healthy. And remember, the vaccine is on the way. I would like to thank our director, Sloan Copeland, JBS's managing director, Dara Golub, our technical manager, Michael Paley, transmission manager, John McDevitt, and to our wonderful producer of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. For JBS, I'm Shahar Azani. Until next time, see you soon and להתראות.